What's up, ladies, gentlemen, people, extraterrestrial aliens and everything in between? Today I'm going to be doing a two-way top 5 list of the most surprising teams in the league, negatively and positively. We'll start with the 5 most negatively surprising, then do the 5 most positively surprising. So without any further ado, let's get started. Starting with the number 5 spot on the most negatively surprising teams. This one might seem a little weird, but I'm going with the London Spitfire. I know not a lot of people had super high expectations of them, however pre-season I saw a lot of people in the community on the hype train for this team. Considering that the team consisted of the dominant British Hurricane core, you know, the team who dominated EU contenders for an entire year, losing almost no games, I understand why people were high on them. However, even for the people like me who weren't high on them, I don't think we were expecting them to go 1-15. I was expecting them to get like 5 wins, maybe 6, but what they shown was absolutely pathetic at times, unfortunately. Not signing Duned might have been one of the reasons, but overall the team just wasn't super well synergized and often relied on Shax and Sparkar to carry them. Molfig was okay at times on the Div, and Sigma, Kellex and Reaper were a bottom 3 support line showing almost no real fight throughout the season, and then there's Hades and Blase who were both absolutely atrocious at times. The once unstoppable British Hurricane roster was now brought to their knees in a 5-map series against the Titans to get their first victory. A real shame how the greatest team in EU contenders history rose and fell. Number 4 is the NYXL. This one also might seem a little weird, but a lot of content creators such as ATP and McGravy had them very high in their rankings, McGravy even having them 4th, I'm pretty sure. This is another team that I wasn't very high on, however knowing that a lot of people were, and seeing them miss play-ins makes me believe that they were a disappointment, especially when considering in previous years this team was always at the top. The tank line was extremely dull. Yakpung was way too passive at times in my opinion. Meanwhile Bianca was doing so bad that Kalios had to come in, and although Kalios was pretty good on Zarya and Sigma, his Diva just didn't hold up, which was especially bad considering Diva was the only meta off tank for about 90% of the season. The supports were also having issues. Jonak was still pretty good. Not as good as his prime, but was still a respectable top half Zen, however his synergy with Friday was super off. Friday was another player on this team who played way too scared and incredibly passive at times. The DPS line was also a small issue. Flora and Guangbun were by far the best part of the team in my opinion, along with Jonak. Flora was a hard carry tracer but also popped off on Sombra, Cassidy and Ashe throughout the season. Meanwhile Guangbun came into play long-range snipers like Hanzo and Widow, in my opinion the best Widow in the league last year, and also to play the Cassidy and Ashe when Flora had to play tracer, but the 2 flex DPS this team brought along didn't hold up unfortunately, so the team was often stuck running double hitscan or hitscan tracer even when it clearly wasn't meta. Ivy was a complete flop as soon as the season started. I'll let McGravy take this one away.
Wake up! Wake the fuck up! This guy is playing the game while asleep! Somebody get this guy some fucking Adderall. Dude, how many times is this guy gonna die with fucking Ice Block? This guy is... Do you not hear the Nano Blade? First of all, what the fuck is this wall? You guys hear that? Yo, you guys hear that? You guys hear that blade? Whoa, the Genji's blading. Oh, darn. I didn't hear him. This is, dude, I'm sorry. This guy's a bot. This guy's a fucking bot. This is an AI. This is a 5v6. How do you not acknowledge the Nano Blade going off when you have Blizzard and Ice Block? What? Dude, this guy does not care about the game anymore. I'm sorry. I usually don't go this extremes. I'm sorry, but this is a joke. This is a joke. I'm sorry. I'm sick of watching it. I'm not gonna sit here and stand for it while I watch some dude fucking just collect a paycheck. This is a joke. This guy is clearly just collecting a paycheck. This guy does not care.
Considering how good he was on Philly, this was a complete and utter failure of a season for him. His Echo and Mei were both atrocious, and don't even get me started on his Tracer. He was a pretty good Genji. However, that's not enough to justify his objectively bad play on all the other heroes. Then there's Feather, who wasn't as bad but was kind of just an Echo one-trick. Even then he was still outclassed by almost every Echo in a pack except for Molan Ran. When they tried to have him run Sombra or even Mei, it completely flopped. He simply couldn't compete with the top flex DPS that APAC has to offer. Year 1 of the rebuild was unfortunately a disappointing one. However, going into next season this team is looking a lot stronger, so hopefully they can go for a redemption arc. Number 3 is the San Francisco Shock. This is a weird one, because the Shock still had a pretty good season, finishing 6th overall, which would be a huge milestone for about half of the teams in the league. However, for Shock standards that just isn't good enough. These guys were the back-to-back champions, and despite losing a few of those championship pieces, this team was still expected to be within top 5 at bare minimum. However, not only were there lots of issues with the team's synergy, but they missed all 4 tournaments. Not getting the three-peat isn't the biggest deal in the world, but to not make any of the 4 tournaments after winning back-to-back championships and making it to 5 out of 6 stage finals in the process was very surprising for pretty much everyone watching the league. Don't get me wrong though, the team was still good. Nero, in my opinion, the best part of the team, was a respectable top half flex DPS playing a top 10 Echo, pretty good Tracer, top 3 Torb, pretty good Reaper, pretty good Pharah, second best Mei, and even a pretty good Hanzo. Then there's Super the Icon himself, who played a top 5 Orisa and Rhine, and a pretty respectable Winston, Choi, who played a top half Div and Sigma, Glister, who was in my opinion a little underappreciated, considering he had to basically switch roles within the team after the mid-season ons for Striker drama. He played so many things, but in particular I was a big fan of his Sombra, Tracer and Sim. And then we should talk about the support line, which was a pretty big mess. Violet was a big disappointment this year in my opinion. Not bad, just not at the elite level he was at last year. He was still a top 3 Moira and a pretty respectable Zen the few times he played it. However, he really struggled on the BAP at times. The amount of good BAPs in NA skyrocketed compared to last year, meaning Violet kind of got left behind to players like Shu, Iris, Fielder, Crimzo, and even to a certain extent Con. Having to play Lucio, Mercy and Brig really affected his play on the flex support heroes he should have been playing. Twilight and FD God were okay as well, Twilight played a pretty solid top half. Ana and Bap, and FD God was mostly a Lucio one trick but was a top 5 Lucio who was very effective, and the few times he played Brig he also looked good on that. However, despite having some incredibly talented players, this team was constantly switching the starting lineup throughout the season, meaning that synergy was never really built up throughout the season. The Shock felt like the only team who never had a consistent go-to starting lineup throughout the whole season. Their starting lineup was constantly changing. The DPS line was a rotating door between Strikerons and Glister, the tank line was constantly switching between Super and Smurf, and the support line was constantly switching between Twilight Flex support, Violet main support, and FD God main support and Violet Flex support. Nero and Choi were the only 2 guys who were always in the lineup. Everyone else was being weaved in and out of the game, which worked in previous years. However, this year was different, and unfortunately the competition had caught up to them. Although seeing the new Shock roster has given me new confidence for this team, despite the back-to-back Overwatch 1 era of the Shock being over, it seems like the Shock are set up to start a new dynasty in Overwatch 2. Number 2 is the Washington Justice. Where do I even start with these guys? People's expectations of them pre-season, at least in my opinion, were way too high. I personally had them around 7th or 6th in my rankings, but I know a lot of people were super high on them. After their unexpected playoff run due to the hog meta, the Justice built what appeared to be a super team. Almost everyone had them top half. A lot of people even having them top 5 and some even having them top 3. Their roster was pretty stacked, signing big names like Decay, Mag and Fury. However, their support line appeared to be a big weakness that most people overlooked, which was a big mistake. This team struggled heavily throughout half the season, finishing 10th place overall. The supports were an issue, but in my opinion their biggest issue throughout the season was how slow they were to adapt to new metas. They started the season off in pretty dominant fashion, finishing their May Melee qualifiers in 2nd place overall, but after that dominant first stage their season kind of just spiraled out of control. As hero pools were put into place, the Justice started to struggle more and more, having major adaptation issues and just generally playing super passive. Further proof of their slow adaptation issues is that their win-to-loss ratio in all games with hero pools was 2 and 6. Sure, they were pretty good at certain points as well, like in Stage 3, but realistically they were only as good as we thought they were going to be in Stage 1. Decay was still a consistent part of the team though, constantly popping off on a variety of characters including Tracer, Reaper and Sim especially. However, aside from him there was no consistency with this team. Assassin was one of the most up and down players of the year. Some days he'd be popping off on Echo and Sombra, other days
EMP engagement, no one's in position. Shadow goes down, Assassin! Assassin! Someone call ESIC! Someone call the Esports Commission! Integrity Commission! Get them online! What is that? Call the FBI! What is going on? What is happening? Pause. Okay. Maybe that's going to explain it.
No, it's not going to explain it.
Oh,
let's take a look at the
here
replay.
It is.
There.
So, okay, he gets the neutral hack onto Sado. They kill Sado. It's Aspire, yeah. Trying to catch
it's trying to catch the Tracer. And Aspire just blinks away and destroys him. Wow. Absolutely outplayed there.
Mag was also pretty up and down. His Winston was super good like we all thought it would be, and in the second half of the year his Rhine was pretty good as well. However, on Ball and Orisa he really struggled to get the same value and was often outclassed by other main tanks such as Gator and Fearless. The few times they played, Jerry and Tuba were both pretty misutilized. Putting Tuba on Brig was a dumb idea, seeing as close as Brig was just as good if not better, and Jerry wasn't that bad. He just never really played, even though they could have used him a lot more on Sombra in the second half of the year when Assassin was struggling on Sombra. Fury was okay as well. Similar to Mag, he was outclassed by other off-tanks in the region such as Piggy Hawk and Hanbin, but he was still mid-tier to above average on everything he played. And then of course the supports. both of which did not get a good rep after this season. Closer and Bebe were both mid-tier to even slightly below average at times. Closer was a good Lucio, however similar to the rest of the team was just outclassed by players like FD Godmauser and Jexay, and his Mercy and Brig were both okay but not amazing, and Bebe was just mid-tier to even slightly below average at times on Bapana and Zen. His Moira was pretty good, I'd argue second to Fielder, but it's Moira. That's nowhere near a hero you can one-trick in this league. Overall the Justice's season was extremely up and down and did not live up to the extremely high expectations people had of them, and that C9 in first round playoffs basically summed up their entire season, disappointment at what could have been so much more. And now for the number one most disappointing team of the 2021 season, it's the Florida Mayhem. Where do I even begin with this team? After their pretty successful 2020 season, the Mayhem made only a few adjustments and kept most of their successful core. All they did was swap out Chris for Slime, which at the time seemed like an upgrade, and swap out Fate for OG, which turned out to be a huge mistake. Heading into this season almost everyone had them at least top half, with some people having them as high as top 5. I personally had them around 8th place, which to some people was underrating them at the time. However, the issue of OG's inconsistency turned out to be a bigger issue than we all thought it would be, and it really dragged the team down. And considering Fate went on to win the whole league with the Dragons just makes the loss hurt even more. Losing Kreese as the main shot caller also hurt a good bit as well. The Mayhem started off the season looking really strong. They finished third in the May Melee and their dive comps were looking super strong. OG was super solid on Winston, Rhine and Ball. Yaki was as great as ever on his signature Tracer and other heroes like Echo and May. BQB was popping off on Cassidy and Ashe. Gargoyle played all three off tanks super well. And Gangnam Jin and Slime were both playing very well on whatever the team needed them to play. However, after stage 1 everything just kind of fell over. The team's synergy looked much worse, OG wasn't looking as good, and Slime just wasn't holding up with the other great Briggs in NA. OG even had to return to Korea at one point and Checkmate had to fill in as their main tank for 2 games, which was, to put it nicely, not good. Although the team started to look back to form in Stage 4, it was too little too late. Their matches in Stage 4 was very tough, playing both NA Countdown Cup finalists and the 5th seeded Outlaws. After Stage 1 they won only 2 of their last 12 games, which was enough to miss play-ins. A team that had looked so dominant in Stage 1 and had such high expectations after their successful 2020 season quickly turned into a bottom feeder. The sad part is all of their starting players were top half of the league at their peaks, but the synergy was just off and not all the players met those peaks. OG was up and down as always and at times just couldn't stand up to any of the top NA main tanks, and Slime just didn't offer the same shot calling and leadership that Kreese did. With all these factors combined, this makes me believe that the Florida Mayhem were the most disappointing team of the 2021 season. Now on to the top 5 most positively surprising teams. Starting off at number 5 is the Dallas Fuel. At the beginning of the off-season when the roster was first revealed, most people were rating them pretty highly, as high as 3rd in the whole league. However, as the off-season went on, people started to doubt them more and more due to a few factors. First is that at the time the team lacked a Tracer player, which was a big issue considering most of the pre-season tournaments and contenders tournaments Tracer was pretty irrelevant. Second is that the team also lacked a Wrecking Ball player, which was another hero who was starting to gain relevance in pre-season and contenders tournaments. Third is that their performance in the Nexus Cup was pretty bad, getting 3-0'd by both the Charge and the Dragons. And the fourth and final reason, and probably the biggest reason people started to lose faith in this team, was the loss of XZ right before the season started. 3 days before the start of the season XZ suddenly had to retire due to personal issues, leaving no hitscan player, and at the time this was a big deal. I had them around 7th or 6th in my rankings, but I know some people who had them as low as 9th because of these issues. Almost no one had them out of top half however, which is why I didn't put them higher up on the list. But despite all the concerns surrounding the team, they were more dominant than most of us thought they'd be. They were able to overcome the issue of no hitscan player very easily. They just avoided running Ashe, Cassidy and Widow. Other than those 3 heroes, Sparkle and Doha were able to run pretty much every DPS in the game. Sparkle was able to pick up the Tracer over the off-season and looked surprisingly good on it, definitely top half, and despite not being the best at it, Fearless was able to become a pretty good ball by the end of the season. What Coach Rush and his guys were able to build during the off-season was incredible. And the fact that the team was able to win Stage 1 after losing one of their starters just 3 days before the season started is incredible. They finished top of NA and 2nd place overall. Everyone on the team was elite. Sparkle and Doha were both super flexible and were reliable playmakers on almost everything they touched. Fearless, the superstar main tank himself, played the best Winston and Rhine in the league along with a top 5 Wrecking Ball. Hanbin was arguably the best off-tank in the league, playing the best D.Va in the league and easily a top 5 Zarya and Sigma. Fielder played every flex support to a top half level and playing by far the best Moira in the league. And finally Jexay, who was arguably the worst part of the team, was still a top 5 Lucio and OK on Brig and Mercy. The team functioned like a well-oiled machine. The Element Mystic core was super well synergized and everyone did their part. Their dives were always so well synergized, their rush was super oppressive for the opposing team to deal with, and the team was overall just a revolutionary group of gamers, the likes of which we may never see again. Number 4 is the Chengdu Hunters. For the first time in this franchise's history, they managed to make their chaotic style of play actually work to an elite level. During the off-season no one rated them super low, however most people didn't have them any higher than 8th, and that was only for the true believers. But not only did they far exceed their mid-tier expectations, but they had the literal league MVP. Their season started off with a bang. Sure, they lost a map to the Valiant, but they 3-0'd the Shanghai Dragons to start the season off, which was impressive enough on its own. But they continued their good performances into the Stage 1 playoffs, beating the Seoul Dynasty in the knockouts and finishing 4th in the Stage 1 playoffs. Stage 2 they didn't do super well, likely due to both Tracer and Sombra being banned, which were both heroes that Leave and Jinmu were especially good at. But the second half of their season is where things really start to heat up. Despite Elsa retiring in the middle of the season, the team managed to adapt with Late Young in the lineup and finished 2nd place in both Stage 3 and Stage 4. The team had started to really set a name for themselves. Leave was obviously the star of the show. He won MVP, had probably the most flexible hero pool in the league, and was a beast on everything he played. However, the rest of the team was super strong as well. Jinmu on his comfort picks was unstoppable at times. Heroes like Pharah, Genji and Sombra. When Leave wasn't carrying the team, it was him. Gaga was arguably the best ball in the league, 2nd best in my opinion, and offered flexibility onto other heroes such as Winston and Orisa, the likes of which Among did not offer in previous years. Late Young, despite being forced into the lineup mid-season, managed to play a top 5 D.Va and a top 3 Zarya, and I was a big fan of the way he played around Gaga. Monk was the 2nd best Zen in the league in my opinion and had a top half Ana and Bap. I loved the way he played a super aggressive playmaking Zen. It reminds me a lot of 2020 Violet on Zen, and the way he played a defensive yet effective Ana. And finally the main support position, which was a rotating door throughout the season, for the first half of the regular season when Elsa was still around, and also during playoffs when Yveltal was reading manga during scrims. Nisha played and had the 2nd best Mercy in the league in my opinion, and his Brig was okay as well. This guy has some of the best Mercy mechanics I've ever seen. and during the second half of the season when Elsa retired and Late Young became the new off-tank starter, Yveltal played due to having built up synergy with Late Young in contenders. This guy had a top-tier Mercy as always, not as good as Nisha's in my opinion but still top 3 for sure, and his Brig is top 3 as well. This guy had some super impressive moments on the main support and is the only hyper-aggressive main support in the league who is not defined by his Lucio play. He was never afraid to go super aggro with the Mercy Glock or Brig Flail, but never fed while doing it because he played around his team so well. Despite this team being pretty underwhelming during playoffs, what they achieved in the second half of the regular season is enough to put them on the list. 2 second-place finishes in the monthly tournaments, the league MVP himself, and having a stellar 11-5 record throughout the regular season. Number 3 is the Paris Eternal. These guys were such a pleasant surprise all the way through. The pre-season expectation for them for a vast majority of people was bottom 3. Second to Vancouver as the worst team in NA. Personally I had them 18th, right where most people had them. But what they showed throughout all of the regular season was so incredibly fun to watch. 8 wins was over double the amount that most people expected out of them. Personally I thought they would get 4 wins if they were lucky, but it took some real believers to think that they would win any more than that. But not only did they surpass expectations, but they were the ultimate underdog in the process. Everyone was always rooting for them in those big games, and despite not pulling out any victories in play-ins or stage playoffs they always made it close, and they were also so fun to watch. 8-8 record in the regular season was huge for this team, and sure half of their wins were against London and Vancouver, but they were expected to be worse than London by most people. But they also pulled off some incredible upsets. The Fuel and Glads games are the 2 I want to highlight, because not only were both games super fun to watch, but the fact that they beat 2 of the top NA teams is incredible. Sure they weren't the best team in the world, but they were miles better than we all thought they'd be, and there's no denying that. And you also have to take into account the fact that this team was playing off hyping from EU. And there was no team base, meaning the players all had to play from their houses all across EU, not to mention they lost Illivote and Neptune mid-season and had to replace them within a matter of days, all of this combining into one hell of an underdog story. All the players were super fun to watch. Naga's Echo and Farah play was a thing of legends. He even set the record for most final blows on a map of Ilios on Echo that one time against the Justice. Unigod was in my opinion the worst part of the team, but even he had some really good moments on Cassidy and Hanzo among other heroes. Vestola was a super good D.Va player and his Sigma was also pretty good. Con in my opinion was the best part of the team, and my oh my was his Ana and Zen play otherworldly. The way he managed to keep his team alive and output a ton of damage at the same time on both heroes is incredible. Dridro was one of the best Brigs in the league and had a pretty good Mercy and Lucio to go with it, and Don was a super fun personality along with being a top half Wrecking Ball, top half Orisa, pretty good Rhine, and he even pulled out Hog those few times and in my opinion played the best Hog in the league. Arvola, their general manager, deserves so much praise for what she was able to pull off in Season 4, the fact that she had to assemble a team with no team base, on hyping, and with a low budget and still managed to make a respectable roster is incredible. And I'd also like to point out that Illivote retired one day before one of their games, and Arvolal managed to swoop up Vestola within that small window of time, and they still managed to win their next game against Boston. It takes another level of team building to make that happen. Head coach Get Amazed as well deserves a ton of credit. This guy was in the Coach of the Year conversation for a little while. His most famous moment is probably his pep talk in between maps that led the Eternal to reverse sweeping the Gladiators, but he too helped form this incredible Eternal roster despite all the difficulties. I really hope this guy gets picked up again by another team, cause with better resources this guy could lead any team to victory. Overall, this Eternal team faced so many difficulties last season, putting them at an objective disadvantage, yet they made the absolute best out of their situation and upset all expectations people had of them. Number 2 is the Houston Outlaws. Now these guys were a real delight to see. Most people had this team round 16th in the overall standings. Their roster didn't really appear too strong on paper, especially the tank line, who felt very unproven among the rest of their rookie class. However, this is one I will always hold close to my heart because I had this team 10th in my standings. I had the hopium to its highest on this team, and it paid off. After 3 straight years of nothing but misery, the Outlaws finally got somewhere. They started off their season in the biggest way possible, upsetting the defending champions, the San Francisco Shock, and although the team ended up being not as good as we all thought they'd be, it was a huge upset at the time, and they went on to finish the stage 4-0, which no one saw coming. And although they missed out on the Stage 1 playoffs, they had still upset all expectations within the first stage. Second stage rolled around and they were just as good, and although the team looked a little shaky or in the second half of the season and play-ins when the meta didn't favor them anymore and they stopped running Rhine comps for no reason, the team was still miles better than all expectations, except mine. Just like the Eternal, this team was never able to fully show up when it mattered most in any stage playoffs or the play-ins, but they had still built a respectable top half roster. The DPS line was pretty consistent. Dante and Happy had some very high highs and both had decent hero pools. Dante could play the Matracer Sombra and Echo to a top half level, and Happy could play a top half Cassidy, Hanzo, Ashwidow and Sim. The tank line, which everyone was worried about, was in my opinion the most surprising part of the team, the part that exceeded expectations the most. I remember being in Lord Enzo's stream the night before the start of the season. In case you don't know who that is, it was one of the Outlaws 4 content creators last year, and I was doubting Piggy and Chengdu, but Lord Enzo told me that they were top tier, and boy was he right. Piggy was a top half diva, a top 3 Zarya, and in my opinion the best Sigma in the league. Meanwhile Chengdu was a top half Winston and Orisa, and at his peak in stage 1 his Rhine was the best in the league. These two were cracked as hell at their peaks and became instant superstars, and in my opinion Piggy was the Rookie of the Year frontrunner in the first half of the year before Pelican blew everyone out the water. Then finally the supports also exceeded expectations a pretty good bit. Crimzo was super solid on every flex support, his BAP in particular was top 5 in my opinion, and Juby, the first player to come straight from collegiate to the league, was super underrated in my opinion. His Lucio was top 5 in my opinion when he played it, and his Brigand Mercy were both super solid as well. Then Jake was solid as well. He mostly only played Brig, which he was okay at, and his Mercy was also okay, but he isn't the main highlight of this team, let's be honest. The power of Junkbuck and Harshaw was strong with this team, and sure they had the fair bit of issues such as the inability to adapt mid-game, but the team still had by far their best year in league history and pulled off a couple huge upsets throughout the season. And heading into next season this team is looking even stronger, which means finally Outlaws fans have something to feel happy about. What a turnaround for this historically bottom tier team. Number 1 is the Atlanta Reign. These guys blew everyone out of the water with their accomplishments. Pre-season most people had these guys around 12th place in the standings. It seemed like they were gonna have a similar performance to that of 2020, being slightly above average at best. Personally I had them 13th in my rankings. Despite being a former Valiant fan, I was more rooting for teams like Spitfire and Defiant, who had picked up former Valiant guys, and I don't really know why, but doubting them was a major mistake. I don't even think the most crazy Atlanta believers foresaw them going to the grand finals. Starting off from stage 1, the Reign were looking just as good as we thought they'd be. Middle of the pack, they were 1-3, and despite taking the shock to 5 maps they hadn't really achieved anything major aside from that. But after stage 1 the team just ascended out of nowhere and never looked back. They started off Stage 2 by beating the 4-0 Houston Outlaws, which was a big upset win at the time, and they continued their dominant stretch throughout the rest of the Stage 2 qualifiers and the knockouts, with a 16-4 map differential throughout the entirety of Stage 2, even getting their revenge on the Shock with a clean 3-0 to qualify for the Stage 2 finals. And even though they got stomped out of the June Joust by the Red Hot Fuel and Dragons, they still managed to beat the NYXL in round 1 and went on a 13-map win streak spanning from their game against Vancouver all the way till the first map against Dallas in the second round of the June Joust. To put that in perspective, it was the second longest map win streak in the league last year. Stage 3 rolled around and they were just as dominant, this time having a 15-5 map differential and once again qualifying for stage playoffs. And although they once again got stomped out by the Fuel and Dragons, the team was still dominant against all other opponents and were a top 5 team for sure. Stage 4 rolls around and this was their most dominant look yet. The team just seemed to be getting better and better. They pulled off a 4-0 stage to end the season despite Echo and Ash, two of the DPS's favorite heroes, being banned. Map differential was 15-6, on paper not as good as stage 2 or 3, but in their knockout match they were down Pelican, so you can cut some slack there. And even with Pelican on high ping they still managed to beat the Seoul Dynasty 3-1 in the stage 4 playoffs, before ultimately being stomped out by the Glads and Hunters in the next round. A team that was expected to be middle of the pack had managed to finish 5th place overall and directly qualified for the playoffs, not having to go through play-ins. The team had shown a handful of different looks. Their most dominant in my opinion was their Orisa comps, but their rush comps were just as dominant at times. Although they lacked the flexibility to play Winston comps, they were able to play some wrecking ball dives here and there. Every member of the lineup was top 5 at their respective position. Pelican, the Rookie of the Year himself, was a hard carry for the team on so many different heroes. Actually crazy how he didn't get Roll Star, his most dominant being Echo Faramay Torban Tracer. Kai was an elite level hitscan playing God tier on his signature Ash Widow Cassidy and Hanzo. Gator was the best Orisa in the league in my opinion and the second best Shrine along with a top half ball. Hawk was a top 5 Divan Sigma and a lot of people will say he was robbed of Roll Star. Mauser was in my opinion the second best main support in the league and was criminally underrated, having the best Lucio in the league in my opinion, top 3 at least, along with the top 5 Brig and Mercy. Iris was the second best BAP in the league and despite not playing other heroes much when he did pull out the Moira and Ana, they were both top half, with his Moira being top 5 in my opinion. And finally Edison, despite not playing much, still had a pretty good sim Cassidy and Reaper. But then playoffs rolled around, and despite most of us thinking Pelican would be playing from ping due to his collapsed lung, the team managed to drive him out to LA where he would play from normal ping. Despite losing to the Hunters in the first round after a nail-biting 5-mapper and a C9 on map 2, the team ran it back all the way through the lower bracket, stomping everyone in their tracks. Their rush compositions went from top 5 to the absolute best in the league, and their bunker comps were also just as good as ever, and we even got to see them pull out a bit of wrecking ball. The team was playing like a full unit, it was coordinated and dominant. The Atlanta Reign proved that they belonged among the elite level territory of teams in this league. They formed rivalries with a lot of the NA teams, Fuel Glads, Shock, Outlaws, Justice, and they beat all of them. They made it all the way to the grand finals, and despite getting 4-0'd by the Dragons in the finals, they had still made it and showed up when it mattered. No one, absolutely no one, saw the Reign going to grand finals. No one in their right mind saw them surpassing the Shock, Justice, Glads and Fuel all in one run, but they did and proved all the doubters wrong. And that's gonna do it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe for more, and until next time, bye bye.